Imagine waking up in the Wild West. No Wi-Fi, no Starbucks, and definitely no Uber. Just dust, gunpowder, and the sound of a coyote laughing at your life choices. Welcome, my friend, to the land where survival meant drinking questionable whiskey and hoping your neighbor didn't shoot you over cow. Buckle up, because tonight you're about to time travel into a world of chaos, courage, and absurdity, the wild, Wild West. Now, before we ride further into this dusty madness, do me a favor. Hit that like button like it's an outlaw trying to cheat at poker. Smash subscribe harder than a cowboy smashing his last bottle of whiskey. And don't forget the notification bell. Think of it as your personal sheriff, always on duty to warn you when the next adventure drops. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next ride. Because in this channel, history isn't boring. It's a full-on shootout at high noon. If you think your alarm clock is cruel, imagine waking up in the Wild West. Forget your cozy Memorifo mattress. You're lying on a straw-stuffed sack that smells suspiciously like the horse outside. The rooster isn't your enemy here. The desert itself is. The sun doesn't rise gently. It launches into the sky like a fiery cannonball, screaming, "Get up, partner, you've got work to do or you'll starve." The town wakes with you, not because of hustle and productivity, but because the saloon never really closed. Someone is already yelling about losing at poker. Someone else is chasing a runaway mule. And you can bet the sheriff is pretending not to hear the chaos because his hangover is louder than the church bell. Let's talk about dust. There's dust in your bed, dust in your lungs, dust in your soup. Tumbleweeds roll through town like nature's comedians. Silent, pointless, but somehow always in the middle of a dramatic stare-down. People romanticize the Wild West as this glamorous land of freedom. In reality, it's a never-ending battle against thirst, dirt, and the constant fear of being bitten by something small and venomous. Picture this. You step outside. The sun blinds you. Across the street, a cowboy squints at you like he's auditioning for a Clint Eastwood movie, except his gun is rusty and his boots are 2 sizes too big. Horses stomp in the dust, waiting to carry riders into nowhere. Kids chase each other barefoot, ignoring the fact that the ground is basically a cactus minefield. This is the daily stage of the frontier, raw, chaotic, and unforgiving. Yet somehow, people called it opportunity. You'd wonder if they meant opportunity to die young or opportunity to eat beans until your stomach revolts. Either way, this is the morning routine of the Wild West. Wake up, survive the desert, and maybe, if you're lucky, avoid being shot before lunch. Now that you've survived the morning, it's time to eat. And by eat, I mean prepare yourself for a relationship with beans so intense it qualifies as marriage. Breakfast? Beans. Lunch? Beans. Dinner? Surprise. Beans. If you're really lucky, you get bacon grease drizzled on top, because nothing says balanced diet like a thin film of pig fat floating over yesterday's stew. Whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was medicine, disinfectant, and occasionally breakfast. It was strong enough to strip paint off a barn, but in the West, it counted as hydration. If you spilled some, congratulations, you just cleaned the table. If you drank too much, well, you might end up in one of those famous bar fights that doubled as community theater. Coffee? Yes, there was coffee. But don't imagine Starbucks lattes. This coffee was boiled in tin pots until it was thick enough to patch wagon wheels. One sip and you're awake for 3 days. Add sugar? Ha! Sugar was rarer than honesty at a poker table. If you wanted it sweet, you had to stir in a dream and hope it dissolved. The real tragedy of frontier food was bread. Fresh bread was a luxury. Most of the time, you got hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit that doubled as a weapon in emergencies. Soldiers gnawed on it until their teeth gave up, and then they just dipped it in whiskey to soften the blow. And meat? Sure, if you could catch it. Beef was king. But unless you were a cattle baron, most of your steak dinners were stringy jerky that tasted like shoe leather. If you were really desperate, you'd shoot a rabbit or, God forbid, eat rattlesnake. Spoiler, rattlesnake tastes like chicken, but chicken that's been to hell and back. Yet despite this horror show of a diet, people survived. They grew tough on beans and whiskey. And honestly, maybe that's why the Wild West produced so many outlaws and gunfighters. When your insides are fueled entirely by regret and cheap alcohol, starting a duel at noon probably feels like a logical life choice. If you imagine a cowboy, you probably think of a tall, rugged man with a perfect hat tilt, riding into the sunset with a guitar on his back. Hollywood sold you that lie. Real cowboys? They were usually teenagers who hadn't bathed in a month, smelled like horse sweat mixed with despair, and worked harder than anyone alive for wages so low even a tumbleweed wouldn't roll toward them. A cowboy's job wasn't glamorous gunfights or romantic sunsets. It was herding cattle. Endless, brain-melting, soul-destroying herding of cattle. Imagine sitting on a horse for 12 hours straight, guiding hundreds of half-mad animals across miles of barren land, and then trying to sleep on the same dusty ground where they pooped all day. That's cowboy life. Less hero and more glorified cow babysitter. And horses? Horses were smarter than half the men who rode them. Cowboys trusted their horses more than other people. Some even confessed their troubles to them, because at least the horse listened. The horse didn't gamble away your wages in poker, the horse didn't start bar fights at midnight, and the horse didn't smell worse than you. Well, actually, that last one was a tie. Now let's talk about cowboy fashion. In the movies, you see gleaming boots, crisp hats, and shiny spurs. Reality check. Their hats were sweat-stained, their boots had holes, and those spurs? Usually rusting. And if you saw a cowboy in all black striding down the street, he wasn't a menacing outlaw, he was just filthy. But despite the misery, cowboys had pride. They sang songs by the campfire, mostly off-key, told tall tales, all lies, and found joy in the little things, like not being bitten by a rattlesnake that day. The myth of the cowboy as a fearless gunslinger came later. In truth, most were exhausted kids trying not to die of boredom, broken bones, or bean overdose. Sarcasm highlight. If cowboys were heroes, it was only because they survived 3 months of cattle stench without losing their sanity. Though some argue they did lose it. Forget everything you know about law and order. The Wild West wasn't civilized justice. It was chaos in a badge. Sheriffs were often elected by popular vote, which meant the most charming drunk could become your lawman. Marshals, sent by the government, were just sheriffs with fancier titles and slightly less patience. The truth? Lawmen were underpaid, underarmed, and outnumbered. Their job was like trying to stop a stampede with a broom. Towns expected them to stop bandits, gamblers, drunks, cattle thieves, gunfighters, and occasionally, all of the above in the same night. For $5 a month. No wonder so many lawmen just joined in the drinking. Outlaws, meanwhile, were the real celebrities. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, names whispered with awe and fear. These men robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches, sometimes more for fun than for profit. To poor settlers, They looked like rebels fighting against greedy corporations. To banks and lawmen, they were nightmares on horseback. But let's be honest, most outlaws weren't geniuses. They were desperate, sloppy, and often betrayed by their own gang members who wanted the reward money. Billy the Kid didn't live long enough to see 30, Jesse James was shot by a friend, and countless nameless bandits ended up buried in Boot Hill cemeteries with epitaphs like "died doing what he loved, being stupid." Trials in the West? If you were lucky enough to live that long, the courtroom was usually a saloon corner with a few angry townsfolk shouting opinions. Evidence? Who needs it? Lawyers? Too expensive. A fair trial? That depended on whether the jury owed you money. Justice was often delivered by rope. Fast, brutal, and final. The irony is that lawlessness became part of the West's charm. People bragged about living in towns so tough even the Undertaker carried a gun. It was dangerous, sure, but it gave everyone a story to tell. Assuming they survived long enough to tell it. Sarcasm gem. The Wild West was proof that if you mix alcohol, guns, and a total lack of government funding, you don't get civilization, you get a reality show with live ammunition. Step into a Wild West saloon, and you're walking into chaos bottled up in a wooden shack. Swinging doors creak open, dust swirls in the air, and instantly you're greeted by a smell so unique it could win awards. Stale beer, cigar smoke, sweat-soaked cowboys, and the faint but undeniable aroma of regret. Saloons weren't just bars. They were the social media platforms of their time. Want to know the latest gossip? The bartender knew everything. Want to gamble away your cattle money? The poker table was waiting. Want to get punched in the face for no reason? Perfect. You came to the right place. Whiskey flowed like water, except it wasn't water. It was paint-thinner level alcohol, sometimes literally diluted with kerosene or turpentine. Yet the patrons drank it like holy nectar, because what else were you going to do after 12 hours of herding cows? Read poetry? Please. Music came from a piano in the corner, often missing half its keys. Some poor soul pounded out ragged tunes while trying not to get shot during a brawl. The real entertainment wasn't the piano, though. It was the people. You had gamblers with sharp suits and sharper knives, women who worked the upstairs rooms, you know the type, and drifters looking for trouble. And fights? Oh, saloon fights were practically scripted. One insult, one spilled drink, and suddenly chairs flew, bottles shattered, and a cowboy went flying through the swinging doors like a stuntman audition. The sheriff might stroll in eventually, but usually only after the damage was done. Here's the kicker. Saloons weren't just dens of sin. They were also the courthouse, the post office, the job board, and sometimes the church. Yes, sermons were preached right where poker games happened. In the Wild West, the saloon wasn't just a building. It was the beating, chaotic heart of the town. Sarcasm highlight. If Las Vegas is what happens here stays here, the Wild West saloon motto was, what happens here probably ends with stitches. Hollywood would have you believe the Wild West was a never-ending parade of duels at high noon. Two men, squinting in the blazing sun, hands hovering over their pistols, the whole town holding its breath. Reality check. Most gunfights were messy, drunk, and happened at midnight in alleys that smelled like horse poop. The quick draw duel? Rare. Most people didn't wait politely until noon to settle a score. If someone insulted your horse, you just pulled the trigger right then and there. And accuracy? Forget it. These weren't trained snipers. They were half-drunk farmers with revolvers. That's why bullets often hit innocent bystanders, walls, or the unfortunate piano player who was just trying to finish a song. Guns themselves were unreliable. Misfires, jams, and explosions were common. If you bought a revolver, you also bought a backup revolver because the first one might blow up in your hand. Riflemen had better luck, but carrying a giant rifle around town wasn't exactly subtle. Despite this, guns became symbols of honor. Cowboys carried them like badges of pride. Outlaws flaunted them like fashion accessories, and sheriffs depended on them to look intimidating. The reality? More people probably died from bad whiskey than from gunfights. But let's give credit where it's due. Some men really could shoot. Wild Bill Hickok, for instance, had a reputation for accuracy, though even he eventually got shot in the back during a poker game. Because that's the truth of the Wild West. It wasn't about fair duels. It was about chaos, drunken bravery, and luck. Sarcasm gem. The myth of the gunslinger showdown is like the Instagram filter of history, polished, dramatic, and completely fake. Imagine waking up one morning and hearing the rumor, "There's gold in them thar hills." Suddenly, thousands of people dropped everything, farms, families, sanity, and ran toward California with more enthusiasm than modern folks chasing Black Friday discounts. The gold rush wasn't just about finding wealth. It was about collective delusion. People thought they'd pick up nuggets the size of chicken wings just lying in rivers. In reality, you spent 14 hours a day panning cold water, and your gold usually turned out to be shiny rocks worth less than a potato. San Francisco exploded overnight from a sleepy village into a booming chaos town. Tents popped up faster than mushrooms after rain. Saloons multiplied. Prices skyrocketed. A single egg could cost as much as a day's wages. Eggs? Forget gold. The real treasure was breakfast. And who profited most? Not the miners. It was the merchants selling picks, pans, whiskey, and hope. Levi Strauss became rich selling sturdy pants to desperate men who were too broke to buy soap. That's the irony. Most prospectors left broke, but the guy selling trousers invented jeans and conquered fashion. The gold rush brought wild characters. Some struck it big, most didn't. Some found just enough to stay addicted to the dream, like gamblers feeding slot machines. And with money came crime, bandits, claim jumpers, and conmen selling fake maps. Guaranteed gold strike here, they'd say, pointing to a swamp. By the time you figured it out, they were gone, along with your mule. Sarcasm gem. The gold rush wasn't a path to riches, it was history's largest group project in disappointment. While settlers chased gold and built towns, Native American tribes were fighting to survive waves of newcomers bulldozing through their lands. Hollywood loves to paint cowboys versus Indians as shootouts and raids, but the truth was far darker. It was cultural erasure, disease, and broken promises dressed up as treaties. Native people had lived on these lands for centuries, building societies with complex traditions, languages, and trade networks. Then along came settlers, who basically said, "Nice land. We'll take it." And if tribes resisted, cue the cavalry. The government signed treaties that they broke faster than a drunk cowboy in a poker game. Land that was promised forever was stolen within years. Tribes were pushed onto reservations, often on barren land no one else wanted. Meanwhile, settlers called it progress. But here's the thing, native tribes weren't passive victims. They resisted fiercely. The Apache, Comanche, Sioux, and others fought legendary battles to defend their homes. Leaders like Sitting Bull and Geronimo became symbols of resistance. These weren't savages. They were warriors defending their nations against overwhelming odds. Of course, history books, At least the old ones often told the story from the settler's perspective, turning invasions into heroic expansion. But the real frontier story is incomplete without acknowledging the displacement, the suffering, and the resilience of native peoples who endured it. Sarcasm highlight, manifest destiny, the 19th century way of saying, we want it, so it must be God's plan. Forget the Hollywood stereotype of fragile women fainting in corsets. Frontier women didn't have the time or energy for fainting. While men strutted around playing outlaw or cowboy, women were the actual engines keeping the West alive. These women cooked, cleaned, raised children, tended gardens, milked cows, stitched torn clothes, chopped wood, hauled water, and occasionally defended the homestead with a shotgun when bandits came knocking. All in one day. If men were the face of the Wild West, women were the spine, and the spine doesn't get enough credit. Some women defied gender norms outright. Take Calamity Jane, who dressed like a man, cursed like a sailor, and rode with outlaws. Or Annie Oakley, the sharpshooter who could split a playing card in half with a bullet while men around her missed entire targets. Saloon girls, too, had their own power. They weren't just eye candy. They managed money, manipulated drunk gamblers, and sometimes ran the businesses themselves. For many, it was the only path to financial independence, even if it came with stigma. And then there were pioneer wives who endured isolation on remote farms. Imagine living miles from the nearest neighbor, with nothing but the prairie wind and coyotes for company. Letters took months to arrive, childbirth was dangerous, and illness could wipe out a family before a doctor ever came close. Yet women endured, adapting and surviving with brutal toughness. Sarcasm gem. Behind every cowboy swaggering into a saloon was a woman back home rolling her eyes and rebuilding the barn he accidentally burned down. If the Wild West had a theme park ride, it would be the railroad. The arrival of trains didn't just change the game. It flipped the board, stole the dice, and charged you for a ticket. Before railroads, travel was agony. You trudged through mud, dust, blizzards, and bandit territory. With railroads, suddenly you could cross states in days instead of months. It was like teleportation compared to wagons. But the price of progress? Everything. Railroads consumed land like hungry beasts. Towns bribed companies to lay tracks nearby, because a railroad meant life. Miss out, and your town withered into ghost town obscurity. Farmers saw their land split apart. Native tribes lost sacred territories, and buffalo herds were massacred to clear the way. Workers building the railroads faced brutal conditions. Many were immigrants, Chinese laborers blasting through mountains, Irish crews laying endless tracks, black freedmen chasing steady pay. They endured accidents, explosions, and discrimination, often earning a fraction of what white workers did. And when tracks were finished, they were usually pushed aside and forgotten. But for all its brutality, the railroad stitched America together. Goods, letters, weapons, whiskey, all flowed across the nation faster than ever. The West was no longer isolated. It was plugged into the national economy, for better or worse. Sarcasm highlight. The railroad was like the Wi-Fi of the 1800s. Everyone wanted it, few understood how it worked, and once you had it, your whole life revolved around it. Picture this, endless prairies stretching to the horizon, and everywhere you look, buffalo. Millions of them, like a living, snorting, stampeding ocean of fur. The buffalo wasn't just an animal. It was the backbone of life for many Native American tribes. It provided food, clothing, shelter, tools, and spiritual meaning. If you were raised on buffalo, you didn't just eat it, you became it. Then settlers arrived and saw the buffalo not as sacred but as moving hamburgers with free leather jackets. And thus began one of the most shocking environmental massacres in history. Hunters slaughtered buffalo by the thousands daily, not for survival, but for sport, or to make sure Native Americans had nothing left to live on. Men leaned out of train windows and shot buffalo for fun, leaving carcasses to rot. Whole herds vanished in days. Buffalo skulls piled up like grim pyramids. By the late 1800s, a species that once numbered in the tens of millions was down to a few hundred. It wasn't just about greed. The US government literally encouraged the slaughter, knowing that without buffalo, tribes would be forced onto reservations. It was less a war against animals and more war against a way of life. And yet, the buffalo didn't vanish completely. Conservation efforts in the early 20th century saved them from extinction. But the Wild West buffalo boom and bust remains one of the most brutal lessons in what happens when unchecked greed meets fragile ecosystems. Sarcasm gem. The buffalo went from being the Walmart of the plains, providing everything you needed in one big package, to an endangered species faster than you can say, manifest destiny. If you think you know the Wild West, chances are you don't, unless you've time traveled. In which case please tell us where to buy tickets. What most people know comes from Hollywood movies, dime novels, and spaghetti westerns. And let me tell you, the gap between reality and myth is wider than a canyon in Arizona. Myth number 1. Gunfights were everywhere. Reality. Most people died from diseases, accidents, or alcohol, not duels. Gunfights were rare, messy, and often drunken. The idea of noble duels at high noon? A marketing stunt for pulp fiction. Myth number 2. Cowboys were glamorous lone wolves. Reality. Cowboys were underpaid ranch workers who spent 12 to 14 hours a day covered in dust, manure, and loneliness. Their job was closer to grunt labor than heroic adventure. And no, they didn't ride off into sunsets every evening. They rode into exhaustion and flea bites. Myth number 3. Native Americans were savage villains. Reality. They were people defending their homes, cultures, and futures from an overwhelming invasion. But that version of history didn't sell well, so Hollywood turned them into stock bad guys. Myth number 4. The West was lawless chaos. Reality. Sure, there was crime, but towns worked hard to maintain order. Sheriffs, judges, and even vigilantes created systems of control. The truth? The Wild West wasn't wild forever. Civilization crept in fast. Myth number 5. Saloon life was glamorous. Reality. Most saloons smelled like feet, whiskey, and despair. The piano was out of tune, the whiskey was poison adjacent, and the dance girls often had tougher lives than the outlaws. So why do these myths persist? Because they are fun. The Wild West became America's favorite bedtime story, retold with dramatic flair. Who wants to watch a movie about a cowboy dying from dysentery when you can watch John Wayne shoot 6 bandits with perfect aim? Sarcasm highlight. The Wild West you know is less history and more theme park. It's Disneyland with more dust and fewer churros. Every boom has a bust, and the Wild West was no exception. The same towns that once boomed with gold fever, railroad workers, and cattle drives eventually went silent. Ghost towns weren't born from ghost stories. They were born from economics. Imagine a mining town where, overnight, the gold vein runs dry. Miners pack up, saloons shutter, and the piano player hops the next train out of town. Within weeks, streets that once echoed with shouting, gunfire, and drunken singing fall quiet. Dust replaces people, tumbleweeds replace wagons, and the only residents left are coyotes and creaky floorboards. Some towns died because railroads changed routes. If your town wasn't on the line, tough luck. No supplies, no visitors, no future. Others collapsed when cattle trails shifted, or when resources like timber were stripped bare. The Wild West was harsh. One season you're booming, the next season you're forgotten. What makes ghost towns fascinating is their eerie preservation. Walk into some even today and you'll find old saloons with shot glasses still behind the bar, churches with hymnals collecting dust, and houses with furniture intact, as if the owners left in a hurry and never returned. Hollywood loves to romanticize ghost towns as haunted by spirits of gunslingers. But the real ghosts are the broken dreams of people who gambled everything on the frontier and lost. Sarcasm gem. Ghost towns are basically the abandoned shopping malls of the 1800s. Once shiny symbols of prosperity, now silent reminders of how quickly trends die. By the late 1800s, the so-called Wild West was running out of room to be wild. The Census Bureau even declared in 1890 that the American frontier was officially closed. No more wide-open unknowns. No more last frontiers. The West had been mapped, fenced, railroaded, and civilized into something less romantic but far more predictable. Law enforcement grew stronger. Towns established permanent governments, schools, and churches. Outlaws who once ran wild were either killed, captured, or turned into legends in dime novels. Buffalo Bill turned the chaos of the frontier into a traveling circus, literally. His Wild West show toured the world, packaging the drama into entertainment. Native Americans, meanwhile, were largely confined to reservations, their cultures suppressed by forced assimilation. The wild resistance that had defined so many battles gave way to survival under suffocating government control. Cowboys became wage workers for cattle companies instead of free riders. Prospectors faded away as industrial mining companies took over with machines. And the dream of reinventing yourself in the West became less about staking a claim and more about buying land from a bank. But here's the irony. The West didn't really die. It became myth. The end of the frontier gave birth to the legend of the frontier. Novels, movies, and shows turned real hardships into tall tales. The Wild West became America's favorite bedtime story, told over and over again. With more whiskey, more gunfights, and way fewer dysentery deaths. Sarcasm highlight. The Wild West didn't end. It just got a Hollywood agent. Let's be honest. If you were magically dropped into the Wild West, chances are you wouldn't last a week. Forget duels. Forget stampedes. You'd probably keel over from sunstroke or snakebite before anyone even bothered to ask your name. But don't panic yet, because here's your step-by-step starter pack for surviving day one as a cowboy. Think of it as your 19th century survival kit. Minus Wi-Fi, deodorant, and the basic human right to drink clean water whenever you want. First rule, the hat. No, it's not just a fashion statement. The cowboy hat is basically your portable air conditioner, umbrella, and mosquito swatter all rolled into one. Without it, the sun will fry you like bacon on an iron skillet. And if you're imagining some sleek Hollywood cowboy hat, wrong. Real cowboy hats were shaped like practical buckets to keep rain out of your eyes and dust out of your mouth. Forget looking stylish. The real style was not dead. Second, the boots. Forget sneakers. Cowboy boots were tall, thick, and pointy for a reason: protection. When you're riding through grass full of rattlesnakes, You want leather armor between your ankles and a set of fangs. Oh, and those little heels on cowboy boots? They are not for fashion strutting. They are designed to hook into stirrups so you don't slide off your horse like a sack of potatoes. Because let's be real, gravity was the deadliest outlaw of them all. Third, the gun. Now, don't get too excited. Hollywood taught you cowboys were sharpshooting gods who could hit a coin tossed in the air. Reality check. Most cowboys weren't gunslingers, and most pistols were wildly inaccurate. Still, not carrying one was like walking through a sketchy alley at midnight yelling, "Rob me, I'm defenseless." The trick wasn't to be the fastest shooter. It was to convince others you were crazy enough to use it. Bluffing, my friend, was a cowboy's best weapon. And finally, the horse. This wasn't just a pet. It was your car, truck, and Uber rolled into one. Without a horse, you weren't a cowboy. You were just a guy standing in the desert waiting to die of dehydration. But beware, horses weren't magical Hollywood beasts. They kicked, bit, bolted, and occasionally decided mid-gallop that you should experience what it feels like to fly headfirst into a cactus. Choose your horse wisely, because in the Wild West, your life was only as reliable as the four legs carrying you. So there you have it, the bare minimum for survival. Without these essentials, you wouldn't even make it to the first saloon door before life handed you the dusty, unforgiving version of game over. Now that you're geared up and mounted on your reluctant four-legged Uber, let's talk about food. You might think of the Wild West as steaks sizzling over campfires, cowboy coffee boiling in tin pots, and cheerful singing under the stars. Yeah. No. The reality was more like chewing on leather-tough jerky until your teeth cracked, washing it down with bitter coffee that tasted like ashes, and then arguing with your stomach for the rest of the night. A cowboy's diet was simple, repetitive, and, let's be honest, mildly depressing. Beans, bacon, bread, and coffee. That's it. Day after day. Trail drive after trail drive. Ever heard the phrase cowboy coffee? Don't get excited. This wasn't artisanal, fair trade, pour-over hipster coffee. This was ground beans dumped straight into boiling water, stirred with a stick, and strained with your teeth. If it didn't taste like burnt socks, it wasn't cowboy coffee. Then there was whiskey. Ah yes, the magical liquid solution for every cowboy problem. Got shot? Whiskey. Heartbroken? Whiskey. Snake bite? More whiskey. Unfortunately, Wild West whiskey wasn't exactly top-shelf Jack Daniels. It was often a lethal cocktail of raw alcohol, turpentine, and whatever brown liquid the bartender had lying around. Some cowboys literally went blind drinking it. If you want to survive, sip carefully, or better yet, pretend to drink and secretly stick to water. Which brings us to the deadliest enemy of them all, dysentery. Forget shootouts and stampedes. Bad water killed more cowboys than bullets ever did. The West was full of rivers, but most of them doubled as cow toilets. One sip and you'd be sprinting for the nearest bush, wishing death would come faster. Smart cowboys boiled their water. Dumb cowboys died of the runs. Harsh, but true. And don't get me started on trail food like hardtack. Imagine chewing a brick, but worse. This rock-hard biscuit was so tough you had to dunk it in water, or whiskey, just to break it apart. Oh, and sometimes it came with bonus weevils crawling inside. Protein, I guess. So if you want to survive as a cowboy without dying too fast, the rule is simple. Eat like your life depends on it. Because it does. Choose food that won't kill you, whiskey that won't blind you, and water that doesn't double as a cow's personal spa. It won't be glamorous, but it might keep you alive long enough to see another sunrise. If Hollywood taught us anything, it's that every cowboy duel looked like a Clint Eastwood movie. Two guys staring each other down, tumbleweeds rolling by, the dramatic sound of a harmonica somewhere in the distance. The truth? Most Wild West gunfights were short, chaotic, and usually ended with everyone shooting at the wrong person. If you wanted to live longer than a week, you didn't need to be the fastest draw. You needed to be the smartest coward in town. Here's the secret. Most gunfights didn't even happen on empty streets at high noon. Nope. They broke out in saloons, after whiskey number 6, when some fool accused someone else of cheating at cards. Picture a crowded bar, poor lighting, alcohol everywhere, and boom, pistols out, bullets flying, and some unlucky guy who wasn't even part of the argument drops dead. Congratulations, you just became the collateral damage in someone else's bad poker night. So what do you do? Rule number 1. Never sit in the middle of the saloon. Always sit near the door, or better yet, with your back against the wall like a paranoid movie villain. That way, when the bullets start flying, you're not trapped like a chicken in a shooting gallery. Rule number 2. Don't brag. The more you boast about being the fastest gun in the West, the more some drunk cowboy will want to test you. Humility, my friend, is a survival strategy. Better to be underestimated than to be shot at for sport. And rule number 3. Learn the fine art of ducking. Yes, it's not glamorous. And no, it won't make you a legend. But legends don't grow old. Cowards do. When chaos erupts, the smartest thing you can do is drop to the floor and crawl like your life depends on it. Because it does. Want a real survival tip? Be the guy who offers to buy a round after a fight breaks out. Let the hotheads waste their bullets while you quietly sip water in the corner and live to see another day. In the Wild West, survival wasn't about honor or bravery. It was about staying out of the way long enough to complain about it when you're old. Now, let's talk about people. Because as dangerous as bullets, rattlesnakes, and dysentery were, the deadliest creatures in the Wild West were humans. Cowboys weren't lone wolves strutting into town with nothing but a revolver and a mysterious past. No, if you tried that, you'd either get robbed, shot, or end up face down in a ditch. The real key to survival? Friends. The right friends. First off, you needed a crew. Riding solo was basically the same as painting a giant target on your back. Bandits hunted loners, sheriffs distrusted them, and saloon owners overcharged them. But in a group, suddenly, you had backup. Someone to watch your horse, someone to cover your back, and, let's be honest, someone to die first if things went sideways. But here's the catch. Not all friends were good friends. In fact, most weren't. You had to learn the subtle art of reading people. Take gamblers, for instance. Sure, they were fun to hang around, but the second you borrowed money, you might find yourself accidentally shot in the back. Drunks? Even worse. Nothing like a tipsy buddy pulling you into a fight you didn't start, only for him to vanish when fists turned into bullets. And don't forget the law. The sheriff wasn't always your friend. In fact, sometimes he was just another outlaw with a badge. The line between lawmen and criminals was about as thin as the paper their wanted posters were printed on. Trusting the wrong man with a star could end your career faster than a duel. Then there were the native tribes. Depending on who you were and what you did, they might welcome you, ignore you, or introduce you to the business end of an arrow. Smart cowboys respected boundaries, traded fairly, and didn't wander onto sacred land. Dumb ones, well, let's just say their stories ended quickly. So how do you survive socially in the Wild West? Keep allies close, but not too close. Be polite, but not trusting. And most importantly, know when to walk away. Because sometimes, the only difference between a friend and a foe was the number of drinks in his system. In short, the West was less about six-shooters and more about social strategy. If you picked your allies wisely, you might live to ride another trail. If not, well, at least the Undertaker had steady business. If you thought the biggest threats in the Wild West were bullets and bandits, think again. The West itself, the land, the weather, the animals, wanted you dead. Mother Nature wasn't some gentle, flower-carrying hippie goddess. Out here, she was a stone-cold killer with a twisted sense of humor. Let's start with the heat. Imagine standing under a giant hair dryer. But instead of nice warm air, it's blasting you with desert oven temperatures that make your skin crackle like overcooked bacon. Cowboys rode for hours in this hellfire with no sunscreen, no water bottles, and no shade, just wide open land and regret. Dehydration was so common that many cowboys could track water the way modern people track Starbucks. Except instead of frappuccinos, you were praying for a muddy puddle that didn't double as a coyote bathroom. And if the heat didn't get you, the cold did. Nights in the West dropped so low you'd swear someone had switched climates just to mess with you. 1 minute you're sweating, the next you're freezing your spurs off, wrapping yourself in a dirty blanket that smelled like the last 6 cows you rode past. Survival meant layering whatever you could, including saddle cloths, old coats, and occasionally the warmth of a confused horse. Then there were storms. Picture this. You're out on the trail, minding your own business, when the sky decides to throw a tantrum. Thunder cracks, lightning flashes, and suddenly you realize you're the tallest metal object in the middle of a flat plain. Congratulations, you're now a lightning rod on horseback. Animals, too, were always waiting to make your life miserable. Rattlesnakes were the ninjas of the desert. Silent, sneaky, and terrifying. Scorpions like to crawl into your boots at night just to spice things up. Coyotes howled at you like they were mocking your life decisions. And let's not forget the buffalo. Majestic, yes, but also capable of flattening you into a cowboy pancake if you got in their way. Oh, and the bugs. Clouds of mosquitoes thicker than smoke. Biting flies that made horses go insane, and mysterious creepy crawlies that left you itching for days. Modern bug spray didn't exist, so cowboys either suffered or tried to mask themselves in smoke. Imagine going to bed smelling like you rolled in a campfire just to keep the mosquitoes from drinking you dry. In short, if you didn't respect nature, nature didn't respect you back. She'd kill you quick, slow, or in humiliating ways. Like making you the only cowboy in history to die from a bug bite. Lesson learned. Out here, staying alive meant treating the land not as a backdrop but as an opponent in the deadliest survival game ever invented. So, let's say you survived the guns, the whiskey, the dysentery, and the weather. Congratulations, you've made it longer than 90% of wannabe cowboys. But what happens next? Do you keep riding until your horse finally decides you're not worth the trouble? Or do you settle down before your luck runs out? Welcome to the question no cowboy wanted to answer. What's the retirement plan? Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Cowboys didn't exactly have pensions, 401(k)s, or retirement homes with shuffleboard courts. Their retirement plan was usually to die in action or fade quietly into obscurity when their bodies gave out. But for the rare few who lived long enough, there were some options. Option 1. Become a rancher. If you managed to save enough money, which was about as likely as finding a gold nugget in your soup. You could buy some land, raise cattle, and transition from cowboy to boss. Sounds great, right? Except now you weren't dodging bullets. You were fighting drought, rustlers, and debt collectors. Still, it beat dying in a shootout. Option 2. Become a lawman. Many ex-cowboys pinned on a badge and pretended they were suddenly respectable. But remember what we said earlier? Sheriffs weren't always saints. In fact, half of them were ex-outlaws themselves. Still, it was a steady paycheck, and at least you got to boss people around instead of herding cows all day. Option 3. Drift into town and become the old cowboy at the bar. You know the type. Grizzled beard, worn-out boots, telling exaggerated stories about the time you fought 10 bandits single-handedly. Was it true? Probably not. But nobody cared, and at least people bought you drinks out of pity. Option 4. Gambling. Some cowboys decided they'd had enough of dirt, horses, and cattle, and turned to poker tables. Sure, you could win big. But more often, you lost your money, your dignity, and sometimes your life when you ran into the wrong card shark. High risk, high reward, but mostly high disappointment. And finally, option 5, marriage. Some cowboys found themselves a wife, a small plot of land, and settled into domestic life. But let's be honest, most were too restless for that. Tying down a cowboy was like trying to leash a tumbleweed. Possible, but not worth the effort. So what's the moral? If you wanted to retire as a cowboy, you either had to be lucky, smart, or just too stubborn to die. Most cowboys didn't dream of luxury, they dreamed of survival. Living long enough to complain about the good old days was retirement enough.